Great. Well, welcome everybody. Excited for you to be here. I am Paige Sharp and I'm the Deputy Director of Programs for the Indiana Arts Commission. And we're excited to present our third installment of our— Great. Well, welcome everybody. Excited for you to be here. I am Paige. Anybody know why that just happened? Okay. All right, well, I will continue on despite the bizarre anomaly to hear myself, although I certainly enjoy my voice, but still, we'll focus on what we're doing today, which is our third webinar, Creative Arts for Veterans. At any time, if you guys have a question, please put it in the chat function in YouTube so that we can answer any of the questions that you may have at the very end of our presentation. We'll absolutely allow time for that. I'm excited to present to amazing folks today. If you wouldn't mind flipping the slide, who are going to be presenting, and they're just really warm people. One's from the Indiana University Center for Rural Engagement, and the other is from Eskenazi Museum of Art. Now, Todd with the Center for Rural Engagement is their Director of Campus Partnerships, and he's also a U.S. Army veteran. And he's worked in close partnership with Lauren Daugherty, sorry about that, Lauren, who works with the Art Museum as an arts-based wellness experiences manager at the Sidney and Lois Eskenazi Museum of Art at IU in Bloomington. And this is really exciting that an art museum would have an art-based wellness professional on staff. That's really exciting. So we're going to unpack a little bit about their recent experience, their first Creative Arts for Veterans pilot program that they did together. So they're going to talk about that, and they're going to also talk about some of their exciting plans coming up that I know you'll be really interested in learning about. So I give it over to Todd and Lauren.
Thanks, Paige. I'm going to share my screen really quick, everyone. Give me just a second. Can we see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Yeah, so Todd and I are here to talk about our pilot program, Creative Arts for Vets, which is an arts-based initiatives to improve the lives of veterans across the state of Indiana. So even though we are based in Bloomington, we are not limiting our scope to just Bloomington and surrounding counties. Again, as Paige mentioned, my name is Lauren. I'm the arts-based wellness experiences manager at the Eskenazi Museum of Art. Super long title, but it just means that I'm an art therapist. And I actually am the first, well, I always hesitate to say this, but I'm the first, we think, art therapist to work in a university museum full time. So that's really kind of cool. So Indiana's in a unique spot. I do work with individuals of all ages at the museum, but again, for this webinar, we're focusing on our work with veterans. Todd,
hey, everybody. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. And I just want to say thank you to the Indiana Arts Commission for the opportunity today to kind of spend some time with you to talk about creative arts for vets. And so I'm Todd Burkhardt. I work for IU through the Center for Rural Engagement, which is really working in rural communities across Indiana in health and well-being, community resilience, and quality of place. I'm also a veteran of active duty service, about almost 28 years. I was enlisted for some time, then a sergeant, won a ROTC scholarship, went back to school, was commissioned, and then served my last 25 years active duty service as an infantry officer. Been a lot of different assignments and also deployments to Latvia, Afghanistan, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Next slide. We thought maybe it would make sense before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts about creative arts for vets to kind of talk a little bit about the genesis and how it kind of began. And so I retired from the Army about 20 months ago. My last job was at IU teaching. I was the director for Army ROTC. And as I was retiring, I was fortunate I was able to stay at IU, as I mentioned, in a staff position working for the Center for Rural Engagement. But the transition was rough. Although my family, we didn't have to pick up and move, but just the whole part of trying to figure out, transition, what does it mean to be a civilian, being involved in something for 30 years in a hierarchical organization, and then moving to, a university setting. And as I I struggled with my own internal anxiety and just trying to figure out exactly how I would fit sort of in the landscape of the university. I started working with Lauren on other projects through the Center for Rural Engagement. And so she invited me and our staff, about 14 of us or so, over to the Eskenazi Museum of Art for a wellness workshop. And so this was pretty neat. We spent about an hour using a bunch of different mediums. And Lauren took us through a bunch of different exercises that really focused on, I guess, mindfulness, intentionality, ways to kind of, build a little teamwork, have fun together, laugh, de-stress. And I really am not inclined and have no artistic talent, although I wish I did. But I hadn't really used any art mediums besides drawing, with chalk with my daughters on the sidewalk as they were growing up. And outside of that, I hadn't taken any art classes or been involved in any art projects really since high school. But I was kind of really drawn to this because during that time period of that hour, that's all I focused on. And I think there was a peacefulness with it. And at the same time when I was, and I'm still working through my transition, right? That hasn't ended, although it's been 20 months, to me, it kind of, a light bulb went off where I thought to myself, this makes a lot of sense. And if this can somehow help me with my transition out of the military, I'm sure there's a lot of people like me that maybe some type of art-based wellness or arts program or wellness workshop could assist them as well. And so with that, I reached out to Lauren, and we had a real long conversation about trying to develop a project that would make sense, that could really help veterans and people like me. Next slide. And so, why the veterans community? It just made sense for a lot of reasons. I mean, I speak veteran, right? And coming from 3 decades of being in the service, I have some understanding of different issues that veterans might face versus, regarding transition or isolation or who they want to be or identity or uncharting the unknown, or veterans want their freedom and their autonomy, once they leave the military. But then that could be kind of scary to figure out exactly what they want to be. And so we thought it made a lot of sense to spend our time working together with veterans. And so with that, the picture on the right is actually a picture of Lauren's grandfather. Lauren?
Yeah, and coming up with this idea for veterans, this population has always kind of been in the back of my mind. Previously, I have worked with children, I've worked with college students, but veterans had always been really an interest of mine. My grandfather was a U.S. Army veteran, so this is my absolute favorite picture of him. Not super photogenic, and if he was still here, he'd probably not be super excited that I was sharing it, but it's my absolute favorite. He never spoke about his time in the service. So when I was 13, that was the first time I had heard that this had actually been a part of his life experience. And I just wish that he would have had something like this to be able to share with other people about his experience and work through some of those things I have no doubt he was going through. And I feel like with this population specifically, it's important for anyone working to have a sort of passion for working with veterans. You don't have to have a connection like this, but to have, some sort of a passion for this work.
Lauren, just stay on this slide real quick. I just want to add just a couple other things. I think in a lot of ways, and anybody who's served any time in the military, and when we use the term veteran, Really, a veteran is anyone who has served their initial term and then has left military service, or, it's the full spectrum where a veteran could have served at least 20 years or over and had retired. So veteran could be anybody who served, 2, 3, 4 years or 20 or 20 plus. I think another thing of why it's really important to work with veterans, just the real big difference between the military profession and the rigors of that profession compared to maybe civilian sector. And I'm not saying that civilian sector cannot be stressful, because that's clearly the case. But our profession, the military, values stoicism, stability, the mentality of suck it up and drive on. You grow up in a culture that privileges or rewards those types of values, and you transition to the civilian sector and you're a veteran. Those probably aren't the best values to privilege anymore. However, veterans have trouble transitioning where they don't recognize that those still are the ones that they should be guided by. So because of stoicism and stability and the suck it up and drive on mentality, what you have is when people transition out of the military, they don't ask for assistance, or they self-medicate they drink too much or find maybe other vices. And they're not able to sometimes express emotions effectively, because in the military, right, it's about the mission first. People are important, of course, but we all know it's about accomplishing the mission. In addition to that, I think everybody in the military can identify with the fact that they were part of a team. They knew exactly how they fit into a puzzle, or in the pyramid, or whatever the case may be. And then once you leave the service, there's really no more team, or maybe there's no more purpose like there was, and that can become incredibly difficult. And so, for all those reasons, and Lauren's background and my background, we thought it made a lot of sense to try to develop a program. And so when we began this 18 months ago or so, we originally thought the best idea would be to reach out to organizations that had some type of program similar to this, that we thought maybe we could be an add-on. And what we found out is there were programs and they were successful. However, some of the programs were still being developed, and at that time didn't really see how we could be affixed to it or be a part of that. I think the meeting with those organizations were fantastic, because it provided background information to us. And what Lauren and I then decided is we're going to create our own program, which made more sense to develop and start our own pilot program, which we did, for veterans that were in Scott County and Rush County, known as CAV, Creative Arts for Vets. Lauren, next slide. Yeah, I just want to kind of cover a couple stats real quick, just so maybe you're not aware, or maybe you are very aware, that Indiana ranks 16th in the nation for highest population of veterans, which is pretty amazing. And so, of course, we're a very pro-military state, which is fantastic. But I don't think people realize the population of veterans in Indiana. These stats are from 2018. They're pulled off, and I know Paige and Stephanie will share the link with you after this. This is pulled from the VA website. It's from 2018, so it's a couple of years old. So we probably have a little bit more than 410,000, but it gives you a general number. Currently, about 1% of the nation's population serves in the military, right? Whether that's National Guard, Reserve, or active duty, Air Force, Army, Marines, Navy. So about 1%. And about 6% of our nation's population at one time or another had served. So 6% of the US population are veterans. The picture on the right, the darker I think it's orange. The darker the orange shows, the higher the percent, up to almost 9% of that county's population consists of veterans. And so counties like, I can't rattle them all off, but because I don't remember them all, but Morgan and Owen and Brown and Greene and Martin and Spencer, right, down in the South, Lawrence and Washington and Harrison and Ripley and Switzerland, and Vermilion and Park and White, Blackford, a lot of these, as you can see, they're rural counties. And what we know, I work for the Center for Rural Engagement, and what I'm about to say, everybody knows this, rural communities are underserved. And now what you have is veterans who move into or live in rural communities who are even further underserved because their community is underserved. And so lack of access, lack of resources, lack of transportation, lack of connectedness, right? And these can potentially compound any issues that veterans are dealing with. Next slide. Yeah, I just want to draw your attention to this. I just thought it was interesting. So more or less, the Indiana stats kind of mirror the national stats regarding age of veterans and also wars that veterans had fought in. What's I think of note is that about almost 50% of veterans in Indiana are 65 years or older. So Vietnam era or older, so is about half of our veteran population. Next slide. If I ask you to close your eyes and think and picture in your mind's eye what a veteran looks like, I'm gonna guess that you close your eyes and you picture sort of probably an old white guy, right? And that would probably be pretty correct because many veterans are old white guys for sure. But what's interesting of note here is the military is changing. The demographics are changing. And currently across the active force, 20% are Black, 20% are Latinx, and 20% are actually women. And so I think a lot of times when we talk about veterans, you see an older white guy, but could very well be a 25-year-old woman who's a combat veteran, right? That's very possible. And if you look at Indiana stats here, a little bit lower than the national average, but hopefully it will continue to increase, is about 7%. And the reason I bring this up is women veterans, more than male veterans, have a harder time of transitioning. They're even further marginalized because sometimes, I mean, it is the case, right, that some men are put off or don't care for women that served in the military because they sometimes feel that the woman did the manly thing and then don't want to identify with that woman, which is really a shame. Also, healthcare, childcare. So childcare in the military is provided. And as you can imagine, in civilian sectors, especially in a rural community, it might be incredibly hard to find childcare. And also equal pay. In the military, as everyone on this call knows, men and women are paid the exact same based on their rank. It doesn't depend if you're a man or a woman. But in the civilian sector, that's not the case, right? Stats show that men are paid much higher than women are. And so what you have is the women population who leave the military and then even have a harder time with transitioning because of these other obstacles that they faced that male veterans don't. And the reason I mention this, our Creative Arts for Vets program, the pilot program consisted of 10 veterans. And those 10 veterans, 75% of those were women. And I think that's fantastic, right? It wasn't necessarily we were going out to look for women veterans or male veterans. We were just looking for veterans who were interested in being a part of this program for one reason or another. But I'm happy to say, we're here to serve all veterans. And so it doesn't matter, right? If you're interested in being a part of a program or want to take part, then we would love that opportunity. I would also say that the group of veterans that we work with, the 10 of them, they were all veterans during the last 20 or 30 years. So the oldest veteran was 51. I think the youngest was somewhere in the mid 30s. And so they served during, the Iraq War, Afghanistan War. But there was nobody who was of Vietnam era service. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions at the end if there's any particulars on this, but I'd like to now turn it over to Lauren.
And, Todd mentioned some stats. We've talked about why the veteran population, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about why specifically art is beneficial for this population. In addition to, my background as an art therapist, so kind of art's a given if we're, if you're working with me, art's a given. But going back to some of those things that Todd mentioned at the beginning, that idea of veterans struggling, to reintegrate into civilian society. that idea of having, you know, an unstructured life. The military is very structured. So with art making and unstructured art directives, which I gave some of our group members, we can begin to explore that idea of unstructuredness, you know, taking risks. And that's okay to do with art because, you know, nothing really happens if we mess up. You know, art's kind of a safe place to take risks and explore that a little bit. Also that idea of isolation. So our experience was a group experience for veterans. It wasn't individual art therapy. This was a group art therapy experience. So automatically right there, we're connecting rural veterans with each other. That helps build that sense of community, release a little bit of that feeling of isolation. But also, you know, it helps with that greater stigma of mental health. You know, I'm the only one struggling with depression, or I'm the only one struggling with anxiety or PTSD. And that's just not the case. It feels that way, but it's not the case. So that's the idea of, you know, bringing a group of people together with a similar experience that helps with that isolation. And art just generally is a really good way to express yourself emotionally, to kind of get those thoughts that are in your head out on paper. And we didn't have Melissa come with us today, but Melissa was also a partner with us on this project. And she has been making art long before she helped assist us with this group. But she has a passion. She's also a Marine veteran. She has a real passion for art making to have some sort of emotional release herself. And so she was actually on the ground helping kind of sell this group to veterans, especially in Rush County for us. And I think that helped a lot, them hearing about her personal experience, being able to use art as a tool for self-regulation, for, you know, a coping skill, stress relief. That was really integral to the success of this project. I'm going to talk a little bit about outcomes of our project. This was a pilot program. And as with any pilot program, our goal is always to have, you know, a good experience. We hope people have a good experience, but it also is a chance for us to learn how we can better serve, how we can serve veterans in our Indiana community. So we noticed a couple of things after we were kind of reflecting on this group experience. We noticed a lot of drawings and expression with the idea of achieving freedom or autonomy. And you might be thinking, well, they're free, they're out of the military, like they're back in civilian life, but it doesn't feel freeing to them. It feels kind of paralyzing, not knowing what to do in that unstructured environment. So we noticed a lot of drawings about that. And we talked through a lot of those issues that a lot of the veterans were bringing up. We also noticed some things like people using art outside of session. So with any art therapy experience, my goal is to get people to be able to use these things outside of session, right? So to recognize that art is a coping skill that they can then use without me necessarily having to be there. So we had a couple of people who have bought art supplies or, you know, told us at the next group meeting, like, hey, I used this when my kids were driving me nuts and I needed to go out and just kind of decompress and have a moment to myself. So that was really, really exciting to see. The group, not super surprising, but they were uncomfortable with unstructured art making as a whole. Some people did really great with it, but as a whole, they really kind of struggled with that. And again, this was a really safe place for them to explore that. And by the end, those who had challenges were kind of becoming a little more comfortable with the idea of something unstructured. There also was a desire to listen to music while art making. I couldn't play music for them. We were on Zoom. It was a virtual group, but many chose to play music. I find that music kind of helps the art process a little bit. It helps to get us out of our heads a little bit and be able to express ourselves. So those are some of the things that we noticed. We also, we started with 10 veterans, and some of them kind of trickled off there at the end. They didn't come back. They didn't return to our group meetings. And again, you know, it's not super surprising. We're dealing with, you know, a mental health related group. And sometimes that's too much for people. Sometimes they aren't ready to make that leap, and it takes 3 or 4 group meetings for them to realize that this is too much, and they chose to take a step back. Others were not really sure, why they didn't return. But based on our pre and post survey results, I have a strong hunch that it was because we were not able to meet in person. Overarching comment, when we asked what could be improved, everybody said, please meet in person, please meet in person, please meet in person. So, moving forward, and with COVID kind of not, coming to a halt, but we're getting back to normal life, I feel like in-person meetings are just going to be way better for us, and way better for the veterans, right? And you might be thinking, well, we're working with rural communities. Wouldn't an in-person meeting maybe not be great because they're coming from all corners of the county? But in rural communities, we also see a lot of disparities in internet access. So a Zoom group isn't necessarily the right way to go for a rural group. With this group specifically, we had the Elks Association in Rushville serve as a meeting spot for those who had poor internet connection. They could actually come and visit together in person, distanced, masked, if they felt, that was something that they needed to do. And those 3 that were kind of there in Rushville had a really good experience, and they commented about how they wished, or how they were excited that they were able to connect with others in that specific location. That's one of these quotes on this page. These are responses we got from what worked well. People enjoyed the community, the sense of community in the group. Everybody who proposed a suggestion or commented on somebody's art making or shared anything at all, there was never any sort of negativity. It was a very supportive environment. Again, having a location to meet other than being at home on Zoom. So for those who were able to go to the Elks Association, that was really helpful for them. Engaging with new art techniques went really well. They enjoyed working in a group setting with other veterans. Again, combating the idea of isolation, right? And one other person put the exercises that we did and the explanation of what the exercise was, the reason why. That's something that's in my art therapy approach. Every time I ask someone to do something, whether it's an individual or it's a group, I always try to explain the why behind what we're doing. I'm not just asking you to work with colored pencils because I think it's going to be fun. We're doing things, we're using specific art materials for a specific reason. So these are just some of the things that veterans were saying. We're using all of this information to kind of propose some next steps for us. We've identified 5 ways that we think we can work with veteran communities based on the information we learned. Smaller therapy groups, like what we have just been describing. And the thing that Todd and I are really excited about is the idea of these partial day or one-day workshops, where we're focusing on team building, active art making, physical activity, some of those things that people are missing from that military environment, hopefully to make that transition a little bit easier. And then also just some presentations, like this. How can art help veterans? What kind of materials would you recommend for someone who has anxiety? Things like that. And also working with families. So using some attachment art therapy to work on strengthening the family bond, which attachment art therapy, if you're not familiar, it's really just about building that sort of connection between typically a parent and a child, or a caregiver and a child. That might look like someone, a child sitting and asking the parent who's been deployed for a while and has just come back into the family for an art material, and that family member providing that material for them. It mimics that sense of, I'm going to provide food, shelter, safety for you. I'm here to support you. So we really feel like we can also work with families in that type of a way. So we're really looking for communities that want to collaborate with us on these initiatives. So if you're interested, I think Paige or Stephanie, one of you is going to send out our contact information, and we welcome any sort of inquiries after this, any sort of questions after this about how this might work in your community or about anything that we shared today. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can have some answers to some questions, hopefully.
And I'll just, Paige, real quick, and Lauren, I'll just add one more thing. And so Lauren just talked about potentially 5 different ways that we can work with communities or organizations. We put that also into a flyer. And so after this, Paige and Stephanie will send that out to everybody who's on today's call.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. Real quickly, when you think about doing this work, are there particular areas of the state, or is it something that you'll want to offer to anywhere in the state? You just can have sort of no preference.
Lauren, you want me to go, or I can go?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I guess anywhere, right? You know, we want to work with veterans. I think both of us, you know, have a passion for this, and both of us feel very connected and close to this community. And I think we owe it to our veteran population, right? And so we'd be happy wherever, you know, anybody reach out to us in this across the state. We'd be happy to help in any capacity and figure out what makes sense. But yeah, absolutely. And so rural, urban, suburban, right? Yeah, I think we're good with all of those. Absolutely.
Okay. Great. I wasn't sure based upon that map if you had some targeted areas with a higher population of veterans or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just was going to say, I think that's important too, or at least I guess to be cognizant of. There's certain counties that just have, you know, have more veterans. So maybe in some ways, in some of those counties, we might be able to have even more veterans participate. That's all. But if we work in counties that have a lower percentage, that's still fine because we're still going to work with veterans.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I'm really excited that you're going to provide that opportunity, and look forward to connecting with you guys after that journey so we can learn some of the outcomes that you learned as well, so that our folks can come along that journey as well. One thing I wanted to note, Todd, I so appreciated that you really provided clarification of why a veteran's transition back is so difficult because of the construct that they're really put in, and then assimilating back out of that construct. I thought was really illuminating. Thank you. And I'm sure that's really powerful for organizations to understand that particular vantage point. And Lauren, I really appreciate your, clarifying why certain things are being done in the therapeutic practice. So thank you for that. I thought that was incredibly valuable. One thing that we have learned in talking with folks over the last couple months is about trust. And trust is a really important component of working with the veteran populations. How did trust building play a part in your program? Lauren, do you want to go ahead and tackle that, and then maybe Todd?
Sure. First, I mentioned Melissa's name earlier. I think she was really helpful for the specific group in building trust. She knew a lot of the veterans, at least, you know, at an acquaintance level. And so they trusted her enough to where she, you know, was able to go and say, hey, this experience is really going to be helpful for you. Art's really helpful for me. So I think that already kind of built a layer of trust. But also, I met with most of our participants before the group started. So they had a chance to meet me, you know, who's facilitating the group beforehand. I did supply drop-offs. And for those who couldn't make those, I did a phone call or a Zoom call just so they could hear my voice and I could answer any questions for them. So that was really, I think, really integral in building trust as well. But also, you know, as a therapist, I often am told not to self-disclose information to clients, which is really an ethical practice, right? It's not about me, it's about their journey and their experience, and I'm helping them along the way. But in this specific instance, I felt it was really important for me to share that connection I shared with you guys about my grandfather, just so they know I'm not just someone showing up who's going to work with them, that I do have a passion for working with veterans. I think that was really helpful for this group too. Todd, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's great. I would just add, I think, we so thoroughly appreciate the opportunity to talk today with the IAC and everybody who's listening, because I think it's important to kind of get our story out. So, this is veterans based. I mean, Melissa is a retired Marine. I'm a retired Army guy. Lauren has, a strong history and background of family members serving in the military. And we think it makes sense, and we want to be a part, and we want to help. And I think if people can understand the background story a little bit and understand who we are, of course, I don't mean automatically you're going to trust us, but I think hopefully there's the beginning of some type of mutual, trusting relationship that then can further be developed through this program. And so, I think that's a part of it. I have to say it's interesting. And I've recognized I've lived in Indiana for the last 5 years. I talk fast. I'm from Philadelphia. Sorry. And so I apologize for that. But I lived in Indiana for the last 5 years. And my last 3 years on active duty service was working at Indiana University as the director for Army ROTC. And I would always have to drive to Fort Knox, Kentucky once or twice a week. And so I hate I-65. And I would always go the back way, right down through Lawrence County and Orange and Washington. And inevitably always stop at a McDonald's or, for gas or convenience store, whatever the case may be, always in uniform, in camouflage, because I was going to work at Fort Knox or returning. The amount of people that would come up to me and say, hey, my father served in the Navy. Hey, my mother, was in the Vietnam War. Hey, my brother's currently deployed. Hey, thank you for your service. Hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I mean, the outpouring was crazy. I loved it, right? I mean, I felt like a rock star, and really, I was just like a soldier, right? And so, just the support. And instant connection, right? Somehow that people saw the uniform, because of course there's not active duty bases in Indiana. There's strong National Guard presence, but especially in rural communities, you don't see a lot of people wearing, on duty wearing a uniform. And so people all ages would come up to me, or, hey, what's the camouflage pattern you're wearing, right? When did that start? Whatever the case. And I just think there's this, from what I've realized here in Indiana, there's this strong bond and commitment to soldiers and to veterans. And I think Lauren and I, we want to continue that, right? My years in the service were fantastic, ups and downs, of course, but overwhelmingly, I got so much more out of the Army that I ever gave, and I want to continue to give, right? Especially to all the veterans back there, who are still continue to struggle in whatever reason, right? And so anyway, sorry, I'm also a philosopher, so long-winded, but we just want to help. And I think it's just through time that you build trust. But I think if maybe people understand our story, at least it opens it up for two-way communication and trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's buoying to hear that so many folks are really supportive. And I know that our field is supportive, and I think increasingly so as we've been on this journey with these webinars. I know that as a staff member at the IAC, I'm definitely more passionate about it than I've ever been, which is connecting veterans with the arts community, whether that's visual arts or performing arts or theater. There's so many different disciplines that can be leveraged in a meaningful way to really connect them with community. When we do have a lot of passionate people out there, organizations, artists, who would like to get started, but may not have access or the funding to bring in a creative arts therapist. Maybe there's one nearby, or what advice would you give them, Lauren? Do they need an arts therapist, or what would you suggest?
So that's a really good question. First, I would say all of the services that Todd and I are offering through the Eskenazi Museum of Art, the Center for Rural Engagement, all of those are free. So our time is free. Any art supplies that we would bring to your community would be free. So if you are one of those communities where you have no clue if there are, art therapists in your community, or if that funding is an issue, please reach out and we can absolutely help you in that regard. But to your question, Paige, of if an art therapist needs to be, a part of this, I'm always going to advocate for consulting with an art therapist before anybody works with any group that, might be dealing with trauma, some veterans, children, anything like that. I would always recommend consulting an art therapist. But if that's not possible, and I am fully aware that that's not possible for every community, even reaching out to one veteran in your community and just asking, what would be helpful? If we were to bring an art experience here, what kind of things would you like to see? What kind of things would help you feel comfortable sharing in a group? What kind of things do we need to do to prepare ourselves to help serve you? I think that's really helpful. And also just talking with local artists too. You might have a local artist who knows an artist who's also a veteran, which is kind of the best of both worlds, who can kind of connect and kind of speak veteran, speak art, and connect in those ways. So I always advocate for talking to an art therapist, but if you can't, there are some other ways to still offer support, even if it's not, an art therapy group, even if it's just, teaching a veteran how to use paint so that they can maybe go, do that at home.
Did you mention where they would find an art therapist if they're looking?
Yeah, so I think in the follow-up email, there's going to be a link to the Indiana Art Therapy Association. There's find an art therapist locator. Sometimes most art therapists should be listed on there, but if they're not, the ones that are listed in near your community should be able to maybe connect you with someone. We have a large Facebook page, so if you just send an inquiry out to me and you're like, I need an art therapist in South Bend. I don't know any art therapists in South Bend, but I can put a call out on that Facebook page and see if anybody might be willing to work with you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to look at some of the questions that we've had come in. This one from the Carnegie Museum in Montgomery County. Says their county is in the white, so it looks like not a high majority of veterans, but a large veteran. They have a large veteran presence and a permanent exhibit section for the military, and they want to know, how do they encourage this group's presence?
That's a really good question. So I would even say just starting to have events for veterans specifically. That's an opportunity for them to come together. The first one may not reach as many people as you want, but as with any pilot program, word's going to get out, and that's how we're starting our work, is by starting small. Maybe you have one event in your community, and then we can start to build from there. I will say, enticing people to come is interesting. So especially when you're talking about art. Because if we think about that veteran that Todd mentioned in your mind's eye, it's an old white guy. Generally speaking, men have a harder time engaging in art making, in my experience, because it seems feminine or doesn't seem like that's something that will be helpful. So even just kind of enticing them with something that maybe isn't, drawing a still life, that's maybe a little more active or a little more engaging, might be able to draw that population in.
Yeah, definitely. Todd, did you have something to add?
No, that was quite good. I don't know. I mean, I think what Lauren said, and I do agree. I think, I'm older now, and not that I'm much wiser, but I do think maybe years ago, and like I said, I hadn't used art in decades, and I don't know, as a young man, if I would have been like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that, and I think there is maybe, as you mentioned, men maybe shy away from sometimes, because it kind of breaks barriers or exposes them in some ways where they don't want to show that. They rather have a strong veneer, right, or a facade. But yeah, I think now, so let me just say this: not only was I a part of this program of, Lauren and I are co-founders, co-initiators of this, but I also was a client, if you want to say. I went through the 8-week Creative Arts for Vets for my own reasons. I deal with issues as a veteran after spending 3 decades in the military and being deployed and everything else like any other veteran. And I bought oil pastels, right? I mean, there's never ever would I buy oil pastels, right? I mean, and so I never, right? And if you would have asked me what's an oil pastel prior to this, I really don't know if I would be able to answer. I found it. I think it helped me in a lot of ways to kind of channel energy, right? And just stress from work and the pandemic and just being a veteran and everything else. And to me, I think it was highly successful. So it was sort of like, not only helping to design this and put this together, but actually went through it. And not that my time is done with art therapy, because I would do this type of program again. But I think it really helped me. Getting back to your question, I'm not sure the best way to engage to get a population out. I mean, I'd say this. I mean, whoever asked the question, if they want to send us an email, we'd be happy to have a conversation with them, because maybe we can, ideate some potential ideas.
Yeah, and I think some of our past speakers too, I think of Joe DeVito, and he's with, I think coordinates outreach around the state. What is a local channel that they can partner with to get the word out, but also co-creating with the local veteran community. What are they interested in, and how they be involved? Because it reminds me of the old Clairol commercial where you know 2 friends and so on and so on. And it's like everybody has their own little network of individuals. So they're much more inclined to come to support their colleague or friend. So great question, and excited that you're interested in deepening that relationship. That's super important. Somebody asked about if we would have slides available. Yes, absolutely. We will definitely have those slides available. And here's a question. I'm going to try to I think get to the heart of what it's asking, is something about within making the art, about personal goals. Did you have the veterans come up with like a personal goal? And if so, how would you have them measure that personal goal? Lauren, I suspect that would be for you.
Yeah, so we didn't have them make personal goals. So this being a pilot program, we really were interested to see, well, we were measuring if this offered them a sense of connection and if they were able to express themselves better emotionally. Those were the 2 things that we were measuring. And in both of those categories, most participants said, yes, this helped them better express, or at least be able to better understand and express their emotions. And also that idea of, combating that idea of isolation, that also was achieved through this group. But moving forward, that would be something that we were interested in. This was also our first time doing a group on Zoom. So we did want to kind of set expectations a little bit lower than maybe I would have in an in-person group, just because people may not be as actively sharing on Zoom as they may be in person, because I can't control the environment in somebody else's space. So, you might be comfortable with, your spouse or a child sitting on the couch next to you while you're doing this group, but somebody else may not be comfortable sharing if that's the case. So we tried to have people be mindful of that. But, once we're back in person and we're able to do more of these experiences and have a clearer focus on what we're doing based on what we've learned, personal goals will absolutely be tracked and measured.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I mean, we did 8 weeks, right? It was a hybrid because some people were via Zoom, and then, as Lauren mentioned, some of them were actually all at the Elks Association in Rushville, and so we kind of had half via Zoom, and the other half that was in Elks Lodge had one camera, but they were all co-located. So the art sessions themselves were guided by Lauren by prompts or questions, right? So it wasn't, I think I saw a question in the chat. It wasn't like free draw, so to speak. It was directed, and then it was directed in such a way, depending on things that, had to do with veterans. And then we worked through whatever those prompts were on a certain amount of time, listened to music in the background, which I think most of us really enjoyed. And then we would share our art, if you wanted to, right? We would share our art and we would talk about what it was or what did it mean, right? And Lauren would then ask some pointed questions to kind of, tease, in a sense, some more information out of veterans if they wanted to share. So it was really therapeutic, I think, in a lot of ways, where every veteran shared some part, some more than others, and then some of it was highly emotional, and sad, for sure, But I think one thing, I'm probably with any type of group in therapy, there was, you can identify, right, with the other people in the room. And I think that's what made it really compelling as well, because we had all been there and we had all done that. And so no matter if you serve 3 years or 23 years, there is a strong bond and a commonality. Doesn't matter if you're a Marine or a soldier or a sailor, or in the Air Force. And so I think that was really important. And Lauren, I think, I did a phenomenal job of trying to orchestrate this whole project as a hybrid model during COVID. And I think as based on, you saw the kind of post-survey assessments or some of the quotes, there seemed to be a lot of people that were glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And what was interesting, many moons ago, when Stephanie Haynes, with the Arts Commission, and I were kind of meeting people around the state, and went to the Veterans Administration, and we're in the waiting room, and there were a couple of veterans there, and they started chatting with us, and we said we were with the Arts Commission, and they talked about how they had gone through a series where they just came together as a group of veterans and they just did art, and they said it was so great because we could just be with each other and just have just a conversation, rather than being in a group therapy situation where it's a little bit more pressure. That was a lot more freeing, and yet they could work on something together, which was really valuable. So it doesn't seem like it'd be too hard to do. It just sounds like just need a little passion, which I think, want to echo Lauren's sentiment, that a passion for this work is really important. And then finding a way to get the input from folks, particularly of a therapist, if you have that ability, definitely the veterans community, and coming together and making something happen just seems to me like the magical ingredients in person from what your lesson learned would be the most valuable. A lot of comments, and apparently Joe DeVito is actually on on YouTube watching. So hi, Joe. So definitely, if you are in a community and you want to reach out to veterans in your area, reach out to Joe DeVito, and we can include his link in our follow-up email as well. There was a comment that breaks down barriers that put cracks in the tough veneer is very eloquently put. Very much appreciated that description of the fears of arts and being a guy. So you have some great fans out here today. If there's any last minute questions, go ahead and chuck them in the box. It sounds like combat paper is a favorite program as well. I do want to punctuate again that there is a variety of arts disciplines. There's music art therapists and drama art therapists, and writing. Think of Kurt Vonnegut, our esteemed writer from Indiana, who was certainly a veteran, and writing was really a key ingredient to his life. So all kinds of disciplines out there that you could weave in with your veteran community. So I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, which is absolutely fine because we covered a lot today. Thank you, Todd and Lauren. I so appreciate all of your time. Feel like we're so lucky to have you. So lucky that you want to partner with our arts friends around the state to make things happen in their community for free is just really exciting.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, and again, thank you for the opportunity to spend some time today talking to everybody, and the Indiana Arts Commission for hosting us. I think, you know, Lauren and I this summer are going to spend some time strategizing and trying to figure out the best way to move forward and work with different communities across the state. We're really looking to develop partnerships, right? Whether that's through the VFW or American Legion or, you know, an arts council or a nonprofit or a community foundation or whatever the case may be. You know, a public library where we, along with whatever that community organization is, can kind of partner up. They can try to figure out how to invite the veterans in and kind of host something. And Lauren and I can kind of really be responsible for, you know, what the agenda is and working through whatever that community would be interested in, whether, you know, it's informational or it's more creative art or it's dynamic art making or some physical activity or it's a socializing event with food and art or whatever the case may be. We're open to a lot of different things, and a lot of those different types of workshops and things that we're interested in sharing will be on our flyer that the IAC is going to share.
Great. Any other last thoughts, Lauren?
Just want to say thank you, everybody, for hopping on and letting us share our experience. We're really excited about the potential of this work in the state, and yeah, just thank you to the Arts Commission for hosting us. We've had a great experience, and we're really excited.
Great.
I saw one last question real quick. If somebody said, "Hey, Todd, what's your favorite service-related book?" Man, you kind of caught me. Well, two, how's that? So I wrote a book called Just War and Human Rights. I'm a philosopher. And so it was published through SUNY Press in 2017. So it's Just War and Human Rights, looking at we could do a better job saving civilians in war. So that's a pretty favorite book of mine because I spent a lot of time putting it together. But outside of that, The Forgotten Soldier, which is a World War II account of a German soldier on the Eastern Front. And the ordeals that soldier goes through is incredibly gripping. Oh my gosh. So, you know, so yeah, so there's the two books. So thanks for the question.
Great. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Lauren. Great to talk to you today.
Thank
Looking forward to
you.
working with you in the future. Bye-bye. Todd, what was the name of the book that you wrote?